So it's only 4 of us. You guys can just yell and shout questions and comments anytime you want. All right, so who do I think I am? I've been around the community for a few years. Developer, trainer, co-owner of a small Drupal shop. Basically, we're just a couple of employees and a bunch of contractors. I have trainer bold there because that's what I really like doing, to be honest. I do long-form training. I do client training. I do monthly online workshops, stuff like that. But being a trainer has also kind of forced me, it's more of my personality, to want to learn the best way to do everything, the most efficient. My family makes fun of me because I try to find efficiencies in every aspect of like my day. So I make everybody crazy with the proper way of loading a dishwasher, which could be a whole other 45-minute session as far as I'm concerned, because I have very specific rules about that. But I do a lot of them, with my consulting clients. I do module development, migration, site building. I really like the architecture aspect of it, information architecture. I do some stuff for the community as well, and I've done code and documentation contributions and stuff like that. And the reason why I decided to write this presentation is that I feel like I've put way more than my 10,000 hours in. I've learned a lot. I've developed very strong opinions about best practices and how sites should be built and what the process should be. And I feel like I have the same discussions over and over again with clients. So I figured I'd share some of those discussions and some of those strong opinions based on my experience. So I've seen a lot. I feel I have something to offer. Yeah. So for me, and I'm not always brought in at the beginning of projects. So sometimes I'm brought in just to do the migration. When I am brought in at the beginning of a project, I have very strong opinions about how things should get started. Because I've been part of a lot of projects, big, small, short, long. I've come on board projects at the very beginning and towards the very end. And I am acutely aware of how poor decisions early in a project can just nag at you and the team for the lifetime of the project. And things that, in my opinion, are relatively easily avoidable with a little bit of forethought and a little bit of planning. One of my favorite sayings, so I live in Merritt Island, Florida, which is that's where Kennedy Space Center is. So I have a lot of friends who work on the Space Center, and NASA, especially people who work for NASA, as opposed to a contractor, extremely process-oriented. Everything is a documented process, because they don't like surprises. They want everything documented, and if you have to do this thing, there's a notebook and a tab with a section with the process of the steps you have to take in order to get there. So, I kind of feel the same way about starting a project. There needs to be a process to get that started. And it sets the tone. If you start the project on the wrong foot and you make poor decisions and then you run out of time or money where you can't go back and fix them, then you're stuck. You're stuck supporting a site that either the authors don't like, or the maintainers don't like, or there's an architecture issue. You're just stuck. Yeah, and because of time and money and budgets, bad decisions made early rarely get corrected, in my experience, we'll say. And so this is the reason why all this stuff matters, right? Because if you make good decisions early, then your site's actually cheaper. It's cheaper to maintain in the long run. It's easier to maintain in the long run. People want to maintain it. It keeps everybody happy. So, it's really, when it boils down to it, it's minimizing the total cost of ownership. All right, so I have 11 tips in no particular order, but we'll go through them and we can dive into each of these a little bit in more detail, or just shout out or ask me a question. This is a big one for me, and you'd be surprised how many clients, this is new to them. From the very beginning, you need to commit to a developer workflow. And this is kind of, for me, the lowest bar. Local, dev, stage, production. You need to have different environments. Developers need to be working locally. I can't tell you how many projects I've been involved on or I've come on board with, and folks are not developing locally. They've got a remote dev server where they're, everybody's, pushing code to at the same time, and, if one person, misses a semicolon, the site's down until they make, until they get that thing fixed. So I'm a big believer in, if you are working on a site in almost any capacity, even if you're QA, you should have a local version of that site. You should kind of, insulate yourself from everyone else. Do your work there and push everything up to a shared dev environment. The team can review, your PM can review, everything looks good, then you move that to a stage environment or a QA, quality assurance environment, whatever your particular workflow looks like. But for me, this is kind of the minimum. And this is a diagram I use in almost every presentation I give and every class I teach. So if you've seen me present before, you've probably seen this. But the idea is that code flows up and data flows down. So if your repository is over here, whether it's on GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever, basically the only way to get changes into that repository, in my opinion, should be from local. I don't care if it's code, config, that should be done on local, and then you can push into the repository. So you're never making changes here, and if you want to be really militant about it, I'm even including configuration changes. Those, in my opinion, should all be made down here. And then when they get pushed into the repo, then as your process dictates, you pull them into your development server, or maybe you set up a different development environment for each Git branch, however you guys like to work. When everything looks good there and it's ready for a stakeholder or a QA person to take a look at, then you pull it into your test or your QA environment. Final checkoff is there, and then when everything's ready, you pull it into production. The whole idea behind pulling stuff behind like a developer process like this is no surprises. You never want a surprise up here, right? This should be a non-event. When you make a change on production, you should exactly know what's going to happen because you've done it several times. And normally when you pull new stuff into test QA, at the same time, you're normally taking a copy of the production database and moving that down. So ideally, when you're pulling code in here, you're pulling the latest code in with the latest database. So this should exactly mimic what happens when you pull into production. So code flows up on the left, and then data flows down on the right. Other than some edge cases, like maybe if you're setting up the project for the first time, your data should always be flowing down. If you need to update your database from here, it should always come from production or maybe another one. I didn't want to put a whole bunch of arrows in here, but normally you're going to get a copy, maybe a sanitized copy of the production database and pull it into local. You never want to be in the position where you spent 7 hours building 6 content types, 14 views, and a bunch of other stuff that's all config, and it's in here, and then, well, the only way to get that up here is to copy my database from here to here. Horrible idea. Especially moving databases up into production, even worse idea. I would recommend don't fool yourself and think that you can start moving, parts of a database up. Individual tables, you write queries to get it done. It's not worth the trouble. So code flows up, data flows down. And this is one of those things where if you can set this up at the beginning and get everybody on board, it's a lot easier than implementing something like this midstream. And like I said, this is kind of the lowest, the simplest kind of setup. The next obvious jump from here is using some type of continuous integration system, or maybe a dual repository model where you have one repository for developers, and then you've got kind of like a release manager who, as things get done, and he checks them or she checks them out and does the and does code reviews, then they push it to kind of like a more like a production repository or something like that. So this can get much more complex, but I think this is pretty much the minimum. Here again, another one that is a big surprise when I go in and see that there's no project tracker, or there's only a project tracker for the developers, which makes me mental. So for here, it's not as much about the project tracker, but it's more for me about the entire team. Stakeholders. Any stakeholders, anyone who is going to be commenting or who can provide feedback, or somewhere in the decision matrix should be part of the project tracker. There's nothing worse than having a project tracker that's just for developers, and you're going back and forth, figuring out features, debugging things. Looks like it's great. Mark it as complete, push it up, and then have some stakeholder throw a bomb on you and say, well, this isn't what I wanted, or this isn't, that should be caught very early on. And the way to do that is to have the entire team part of the process. And this is,
something like Jira.
yeah. There you go. I don't care what you use. Don't use iMeet Central, though, because it blows. So I have a client who's forced that on us, and it's terrible. But, any of these are great. Trello is really kind of a nice, gentle way. It's card-based, and you can set up milestones, and you can move cards around so that, this week the team is working on this stuff, or, suddenly this task is a lot bigger. Let's move it over here to the backlog. Trello is really nice. Jira is kind of, it's very professional. It's I think more for bigger clients, I think. But GitHub and GitLab are, excellent tools, very low cost for private repositories as well. So you can't really go wrong as long as everybody's on board, everybody understands the tool. It's worth having half a day of training, for the project tracker. So you set up expectations, and everybody kind of knows what they're doing, and so you don't fall into the trap of having someone say, oh, I know it's there, but I never use it. I'm just going to send you an email. I'm very blunt with my clients sometimes. I tell them early on that we're not going to respond to stuff via email. If you send me a request via email, I will politely reply back, and the first few times I'll say, thanks, I've added it as a ticket in the project tracker. Here's the link. Let's discuss it over there. After the third or fourth time, my replies get much more curt. I'm like, please add this to the project tracker. So it's a matter. So the whole team has to kind of drink the Kool-Aid when it comes to it. The same thing, like most teams have a project tracker and then Slack or some type of real-time chat, and it's very easy for a stakeholder to hop on Slack and say, I need this done, blah 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 blah. I'm like, great, thank you. I'll add that as a ticket. Let's discuss it over there. And it's okay to discuss the real-time stuff in Slack, but everything kind of needs to be backed up and documented in your project tracker as well, because no one remembers this stuff. No one remembers it. Number 3 is an obvious one, but again, I put it up here because I come on board projects where there's no Git. People are just copying code. Seems like a no-brainer. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but if you come on board a project where and for me, this is a red flag for a client as well. If I start with a new client and they're not using Git, I might change my role very quickly. Because using Git, it protects developers, right? Like if you spend 6 hours on a code, FTP it up somewhere, and then someone else overwrites it, probably have a backup on your local, but it's a lot of time and money wasted. So here's a big one. And, I taught Composer yesterday morning. Use Composer, man. We're professionals. We're doing Drupal 8 sites. You should be using a Composer-based workflow. Is it difficult to learn? Is it something new to learn? I wouldn't call it difficult, but it is something new. There's new processes. You have to forget some old Drush commands and learn some new Composer commands. But in the long run, this is where the direction Drupal's heading. This is where the arrow's pointing. We're not going to go the other direction. There's never going to be a day where Drupal's using less Composer than it is today. It's always going to be more composer dependent than it is right now. So again, at the beginning of the project, start with the best practice Drupal Composer for Drupal projects template. In a few months, there's going to be an official core version of all that stuff, which is going to be amazing. But if the developers need training on how to use it, then get them training. But start early with using Composer. Otherwise, you're going to be in the position that a lot of folks are in now with their Drupal 8 sites, where they have to figure out when's the best time for me to switch from a non-composer-based workflow to a composer-based workflow. Which again, not a huge deal, but it's going to have to be done. This is one that I've, over the years, I'm becoming more and more a believer in, of a consistent local development environment for the entire team. For most of us who've been in the community for a while, what you use on your local is kind of completely up to you, whether you're using MAMP, Acquia Dev Desktop, you use Drupal VM, you kind of roll your own VM. A lot of folks are using Docker. And then there's the flavors of the abstracted Docker, like Lando and DDev and Doxel and stuff like that. That's all well and good. I recommend that teams kind of all use the same thing. I'm a big proponent of Docker-based solutions, because with a Docker-based solution, you can pretty much match, not only would all your your developer environments be the same, because you're sharing configuration, but you can configure that so it matches what's happening on dev, stage, and production. So you don't get in the situation where production is running PHP 7.2 and developer 1 is running PHP 7 on their local, someone else is running PHP 7.1, and someone else is running 5.5, God forbid. The same thing with like memory requirements and other PHP variables. And it's relatively easy with Docker-based solutions for all local machines to have a Solr search server. So you can test all that stuff locally. And not everybody has to be a Docker expert or a DDev expert or a Lando expert. You really just need one person on your team to configure it, commit the configuration to the repository, and then teach everybody the basic commands to get the environments up and running, and poof, everybody has the same local environment. That goes a long way towards resolving all of the "it doesn't work on my machine" issues. Or, our themer with all of the front-end tool chain is out of town this week, so we'll have to wait till he or she gets back. Because if all of that stuff is in the environment, then everybody has it. And it's shared and it's identical for everybody. That's a huge thing, especially for medium to large size teams. So I don't recommend using the MAMPs and the WAMPs and Acquia Dev Desktops anymore. Like I said, I'm a big believer in Docker-based solutions. Drupal VM and virtual machine-based solutions are good. I just think it's a little there's a lot of overhead and a lot of learning that sometimes has to go on with that. I have strong opinions about this one, but I think I'll stop there. I talk fast. Everybody cool? Everybody good? All right, so this is, this would be the main one out of these 11. Because this is the one, if you screwed up early, you're living with, and it sucks. Defining information architecture first with all the stakeholders. And this is not a developer task. This is a all stakeholders task, meaning content authors and project managers and developers and front-end designers. You really have to do this early. So what does that mean? That basically means for a developer, if you're one of the developers on the project, in the back of your mind, you're working out, what are my entities, bundles, and fields? What are my content types? What are my vocabularies? What are my profile types? What are my paragraph types? If you got a commerce site, what are my product types? What fields do I need in my user entity? What are my media types? And then what are the relationships between each of those? What level of granularity of data do I need to collect for each of those? What fields do I need on each of those entities? For small sites, this can be pretty simple. For larger sites, this can be a very complex task. because it's kind of a twofold task. Number one is collecting the right data at the right level of granularity. So avoiding over-engineering, but also building in some future-proofing as well. So that's kind of one side of it. The other side of it is the relationships. How does this entity over here relate to this entity over here? And then once you think you know what you're doing with information architecture, once you have your diagrams or your spreadsheets, however you like to document what the information architecture should be, prototype it. Prototype it early, fast. Take a stock Drupal 8 site, build your entities, build your bundles, build your fields, and put it in front of content authors. Don't put it in front of another developer. Don't put it in front of your PM. Don't put it in front of a QA person. Put it in front of the people who are actually going to be authoring content. Because I've done this process with a lot of clients, and never, not once, have I never received feedback that has resulted in IA changes. There's always feedback. There's always changes. And if you can capture those changes and go through this iterative process and make the changes based on the content authors and re-implement and then have them retest it, you are going to find stuff that if you don't do this, you're not going to find until the theme is done, your views are done, your pages, your layouts are done. You put it in front of an author, and an author's like, well, where do I enter the blah? Or what's this doing here? We never use this. We haven't used this in 4 years. Or how do I relate this thing to that thing? So this is, for me, this is like the most important thing I do with new clients when working on information architecture. And this is a fast process. My goal is when we think we know what we're doing with the IA, we spend a day and we build it out fast in a stock Drupal 8 site. If there's anything like complicated or that's going to take more time, we kind of hand wave our way through it because we want to get the prototype in front of authors as quickly as possible. Give them 24, 48 hours, a couple of working days and some basic instructions. Please enter, 5 pieces of content of these types. Or please, we give them basic instructions on what we're looking for them to enter and what kind of feedback we're looking for. And I guarantee you're going to get feedback that influences the information architecture. And it's so important to do it with the actual authors. This is the one that's going to save the most money as well, guarantee. So the next two kind of go hand in hand, and this, it's surprising that you have to say stuff like this, but and sometimes depending on the designer that you're working with, sometimes this requires some training for your designer. Create a style guide. Help your designer, if your designer needs the help your designer not think about sites on a per page basis. Stop designing pages and start designing components. Task the designer with, show me what the header looks like at these 3 widths or 4 widths. Don't say, give me this page. Say, give me this component at different widths. Try to, and I'm a big fan of view modes, especially in Drupal 8. So task the designer with, show me what an article looks like. Here are the fields that we've defined. Show me an article. You can put blocks in for the header, footer, and sidebars, but show me the article stuff at these view modes. Full page, when it's in a list, when it's in a featured block, or whatever. Don't get lost in the whole page. Task your designers with specifics, and if you're smart about the way you do it, it kind of becomes your style guide. Granted, the style guide's going to have the generic stuff like the colors, the mood board stuff, not the mood board, the colors, the font, the typography, and stuff like that. But I work with organizations where they have an in-house designer and all they're providing us with is full pages. Okay, that's great, but what does it look like in this situation? And they're like, well, what page would that be on? I'm like, don't worry about the whole page. Just give me what a product looks like when someone does a search. Like, what should that result look like? I find just like with developers, you can't go to a developer and say, build a site. You have to go to the developer and break it up into smaller tasks. I feel the same way about designers. Even from a designer, if I was a designer and someone said, create a style guide, what does that mean? I mean, style guides can be, 50 pages, or they can be, 1 page. So you kind of have to, provide structure for these tasks. And obviously, you want to provide structure that isn't creating busy work, isn't creating things that aren't going to be needed. It's all about efficiency. Create a structure for this stuff that gets the team what they need and nothing else.
Do you have any examples of tools you use for style guides?
No, because I'm not a designer. Yeah.
Use like Adobe Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop. It depends. A lot of UI UX people will use Sketch, Adobe XD.
There's some good online ones as well. What's the Figma? Is that it?
So the Drupal design group right now is using Figma.
Right.
To collaborate. So like if you're building a team, kind of like it depends on the type of work that you're trying to produce. Is it mobile only? Is it desktop? Are you planning on printing your designs? You can really just like Google top 5, but as far as it depends on the type of designs that you're trying to do.
What's your name? I'm sorry?
Madison.
Madison. So am I saying anything off base?
No, you're totally right.
Okay, all right.
Style guides are overlooked because some designers have egos where they don't want to share their assets. So it's super important to document.
I wouldn't put that just on designers. Oh, I'll speak for everybody. Don't worry about it.
InDesign is a great program because you can have Photoshop, which deals with photos, and you can have Illustrator, which does type, and have them talk to each other in InDesign. So say your stakeholder was like, I don't like that photo, we need to update it. When you update a file in Photoshop, it'll automatically update it in Illustrator.
Yeah, you can. I often find it also comes down to budget. Like, how big is the budget for the designer, or for the whole project, and how much can we afford to give the designer? I'm very. I don't cover it in this class, but I really value what designers do, and what really bothers me is when organizations spend a lot of money on a design, and then kind of midway through, because of a comment or something, someone say, oh, well, we need, you have a stakeholder coming and say, oh, well, we need this to be different. And that becomes a task rather than going back to the designer and saying, well, how does this change affect everything else? And I'm like, the thing I find myself saying pretty often to clients is, you paid your designer a lot of money for the design, so I don't think we should just go in and start making changes. And because I don't think, a lot of times stakeholders think of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madison, but think of design as it happens at the beginning, and then it's done, and then we use it as a guide, but if we have to make changes, we make changes, and it's not an iterative process with the designer. And for me, I think it has to be, because most of us are not designers, and when we start having to make knee-jerk reactions to tasks and make changes, it compromises the design that we paid so much for in the beginning. So this kind of, again, goes hand in hand with the previous one. I'm not a big fan of just tasking a designer with, go create wireframes and mockups for the site. Again, too generic, too not specific enough. Create them as necessary. Figure out what you need. I normally like to start, if I have any say in the matter, which sometimes yes, sometimes no, with header and footer. Because that kind of sets the tone, that allows the typography to kind of start getting worked out, that allows the colors to start getting worked out. It allows everyone to kind of get on the same page. let's start with some wireframes or mockups of the header at different responsive modes. And it allows us to kind of work into things as we need it. I'm not a big fan of saying, we need a new website, the IA isn't done, and this isn't done, and this isn't done, but go create mockups for everything. I don't feel that is a efficient use of everyone's time, we'll say. All right, so yeah, use the configuration system. This was my 2018 talk. This is what the 11 tips is my 2019 talk. So I'm a huge fan of the Drupal 8 configuration system. You cannot have a basic developer workflow like I described, where everything happens on local, unless you use the configuration system. The configuration system is not one or two developers know how to use it, so we're good. The configuration system is a Kool-Aid type thing. The entire team has to drink the Kool-Aid and use it. There's a lot of great tools, contributor modules that are available to use with the configuration system in order to get the whole team on board and kind of train everybody up. But it's a great system. It's well thought out. It works really well. Is it something you have to learn? Yes. Is it different than Drupal 7? Yes. Is it different than features in Drupal 7? Yes. Is it better in all respects? My opinion, absolutely. It's better. It makes more sense. It's more flexible. So again, use it from the beginning. Because this is kind of if you're moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, you want to get people used, all stakeholders used to the new process. And the new process of developing everything locally, including config, may not be the way the Drupal 7 site was built. Stakeholders might be used to saying, oh my gosh, I have to tweak that view. Hey, can you hop on production and tweak that view? For me, I hold people's feet to the fire. I'm like, that's not the process we have. So, unless something's on fire, it might take an hour, but let's put it through our process. And this is another a big one, realistic and meaningful milestones. And again, this is something that I think we've all dealt with, where someone who is not necessarily part of the team, maybe someone higher up in the food chain says, we need everything done by October 1st, without having any clue as to what's ahead of us, what we've done, what we haven't done, what the challenges are. So again, usually as a consultant on a project, I'm allowed to be the bad guy, as opposed to an employee where it might be more difficult for them. So I offer to be the one to push back on this type of things. By realistic and meaningful milestones, really what this means is talk to the entire team. Figure out as a team what the milestones should be, what's doable. Break those milestones up into tasks. And whether you're agile, whether you're assigning points to a task, or t-shirt sizes, as I was talking with someone else, that they don't assign hours to a task. They don't estimate with hours. They estimate with small, medium, large, which I thought was kind of funny. Oh, is it really? Okay. Whether you use, however you estimate tasks, for me that's a team. That's a developer team, maybe a stakeholder team project. Again, does it take more time? Yes. But are you going to get realistic, timelines? Yes. So again, this is very process oriented. But when everybody has a say on the timeline and the milestones, then honestly, everybody has ownership of it, right? It's a lot different if you're assigned some crazy task and it needs to be done by the end of next week and you have no idea what the subtasks are. That's a very different situation than if you were in on the discussion about what's the task, what are the subtasks, and when do we need it by. That's a job satisfaction, ownership type of situation. This makes everybody crazy, right? Everybody on the team hates this. So in my opinion, I think it's easily solvable for everybody except for the person who maybe doesn't want to give up the control. That might be the most difficult. All right, so those are the 11. So what did I miss? Anything in anybody's experience that they've seen that if it doesn't happen early, you're kind of digging yourself into a hole? Or did I get all of them and there are no others and there's only ever 11? Let's go with that. Right. Yeah. That, so I have a client that's a big library system in Florida. All kinds of branches and, just a fairly big site. And this routinely happens where I work directly for their e-branch. And we will make changes and we will make decisions together and the whole e-branch will be on board and it will be done. It will be on the staging server ready to go live. And then they show it to the library director. And the library director says, I don't like this, this, and this. We have to change this. So basically undermining the work that the e-branch did. So that's, for me, that's like soul crushing, right? Because number one, if that's the type of stuff that's going to happen, then the library director needs to be in on the decisions early because honestly, they're wasting time and money. Not us. We've done, they're wasting time and money. So, and again, I don't know if that's a conversation I could have with, the director of something, but that's the job of the library director to either trust the people in eBranch to make the decisions or get involved in the process early. Because otherwise, it's a loss of efficiency. It's a loss of time, it's a loss of money. So, yeah, absolutely. That's when, I don't like to use the word developer team. I don't like to use, that's why I choose the word stakeholder very carefully because, if you've got a dog in the fight, is that the right? If you've got a dog in the fight, then, you should be present. All right, anything else? I think that's it. Is it?
Getting them to do their business requirements up front is the biggest
Yes,
problem.
but if they don't, then that becomes a task, right?
True.
Then that should become part of the project. All right?
But they should have an understanding of what their current business process is.
Right.
What they're wanting.
Right. Okay, so I look at this a little bit differently. If I come on a project and they don't give me what I need, then now my role for the first part of the project is helping them discover what they actually want. So it's literally a discovery process, and it becomes my role. I'm comfortable doing that. I think it's a skill that I have on my belt to ask them questions that they haven't thought about that I need the answers to in order to proceed. So it's more of a discovery process because very rarely will you come on a project and be handed something and say, build this, and have all of your questions answered.
Oh, true.
Right?
You're going to have to discover along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I would argue that, this is sort of discovery, but it often doesn't happen until after the estimate is done. So I like to try and break up projects into a discovery period. That's one, sometimes it's fixed cost, sometimes it's a fixed number of hours. Discover the IA. And then because the IA, once you know the IA, you know a lot of other things. You really know a lot more about how complex of a project it's going to be. And really only once you have you don't need to know 100% of the IA, but 80% maybe. Only then can you actually come up with an estimate for the entire project that means anything. Otherwise, it's, just crazy talk. So. All right. 42 minutes. That's not too bad. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.